Good afternoon, everyone. It's our pleasure to be here presenting at the FinCloud Security Summit for 2024. We're going to be presenting on the cloud impacts on scoping and compliance. My name is Waleed Barakat from the Global Payments Organization. I am SVP for the Governance, Risk, and Compliance team.
Hi there, I'm Ted Tanner. I'm a principal assurance consultant here at AWS. My charter is to help customers with compliance and audit and risk in the cloud. So today we're going to go over a few things. We're going to cover kind of scoping foundations of scoping in the cloud. We're going to talk about things that need to be taken into consideration for life in the cloud, some scope management concepts for cloud environments, and then some of the key takeaways. So let's start with compliance foundations.
And really, before we can jump into understanding your scope, we think it's really important to understand why organizations have moved into the cloud. As an organization that's facing opportunities for scalability, redundancy, scalability, there's a number of different opportunities why different businesses move to the cloud, but truly understanding what those objectives are, the priorities of those objectives, really leads the organization to align on various security practices that can meet compliance regulations. So as you start to dig into truly understanding, again, what are those objectives that are being sought by cloud opportunities and migrations, it starts to allow you to really dive into understand what data needs to be protected. What are those particular elements that you are providing from your customer base or perhaps your organization, and to whom or to what other service providers is that data being shared? That really starts to provide a security profile on all the different components that are in your control, or perhaps starting to be a shared component with other service providers that need to be accounted for in your security strategy. And as you start to understand what's being built out in the cloud and the data elements and the components that perhaps are being stored there, you really need to start asking, what services are you using your cloud service provider for? There's a number of native capabilities that all large cloud CSPs are able to provide for you. And you really need to understand which are you taking advantage of, which are you implementing natively, or do you have opportunities to implement on a custom one-off basis? What are those particular security controls that may be associated with those offerings, and which components are you accountable to manage? Again, out of the box, there are a number of different levels of security packages and configurations that are available, but truly understanding what are your responsibilities to configure, to monitor, to take action on the capabilities that are being afforded to you. And then likewise, again, from some of those capabilities, your cloud service provider may provide some of those managed services, those monitoring capabilities. So just truly understanding what are you seeking to expect that your cloud service provider is going to partner with you on.
Great points, Waleed. So let's move on to some scoping considerations, things that could impact your scope. Because one of the greatest, most often misunderstood benefits come from the cloud and a lot of the features and functionality that the cloud brings. So from a scope perspective, asset management really becomes key. You need to know what's in scope to protect before you can even start protecting it. So one of the cloud benefits is virtually real-time reporting. You can know what's deployed, where it's deployed, when it was deployed, who deployed it, virtually real time, with the enhanced observability that the cloud provides. The asset management flexibility is a double-edged sword. So things like tagging governance really is critical. So you can keep a handle on what you deployed, why you deployed it, who deployed it, and a lot of times who's paying for it. A lot of teams love to deploy stuff because it's fun until you get the cost at the end of the month. So the finance operations usually enjoy being able to put a price back to the team that decided to spin up 200 test instances to test out a new service. Also, it's listed there. Sensitivity is pretty important from a cloud scoping perspective. So you can filter out things that are in a development environment versus a QA environment versus may actually contain the crown jewels that you care about. So alongside that, segmentation management is also equally important. How do you keep your crown jewels safely tucked inside of the protected environment you care about? So you can do real-time monitoring of your segmentation controls, what permissions boundaries you have set, whether they're network-based, whether they're user permission-based, whether it's a permissions boundary that is unique to your cloud provider. The segmentation management is pretty key to know what security controls you have in place to keep your environment separate and how you're monitoring. It's no good to put in virtual firewall rules and then forget about them. And if you don't have any visibility of them, you wouldn't know if somebody opened them wide up, if somebody straight up removed them. That's pretty important because the cloud lets you move faster than you ever have before. So things like segmentation management really help reduce the blast radius. If something goes wrong, now you'll know a little bit faster. And then equally important, scope changes. Compared to on-premise environment, your scope generally changes a lot slower. If you're building out a new environment, you generally have to buy the servers, provision this or source the servers, get them delivered, get them provisioned, load everything up, test them up, patch them up often. Same with physical networking. You've got to deploy the routers, deploy the cabling, all that good stuff, provision the networks. Whereas in the cloud, you can deploy a virtual data center, shell, and some token resources in a matter of minutes. You can deploy entirely new networks and create new networking constructs through automation in minutes. Because cloud no longer has the OSI model layer 1 and layer 2, everything is its own broadcast domain. So you have kind of low-level segmentation by default. And then because of that, you can also often add IAM permissions, identity and access management permissions, or authorization to every packet of data. So you can maintain positive control over your scope, but you also need to know if or when it changes. Because automation can help you build an entire virtual data center almost at the drop of a hat, you need to know if somebody does and they're not supposed to. So getting a handle on changes is critical to maintaining your compliance and your scope in the cloud. And then some of these impacting abilities are also some of the key differentiators of going cloud in the first place, besides cost. Elasticity, being able to use an auto-scaling group and automatically deploy an extra 100 virtual servers based on your application's demand. So you can set your scaling deployment groups and decide at 6 a.m., I only want 3 servers, but at 6 p.m., I want 12,000. So you need to get better at asset management at scale, because your scope may change dynamically in a matter of minutes or hours. And alongside of that, the automation. It's great that you get reduced administrative connectivity, ideally, but you also need the change detection and incident response to go with it. The nice thing is you can also automate that. You can auto heal your environment. You can have auto remediation of your security controls. You can now enforce a lot of the configuration standards that your security policies require. Now, from a segmentation standpoint, you have limited responsibility for a lot of the lower layers, the physical aspects of the cloud. You get new interesting DMZ options based on the kind of the abstraction of many of the cloud services and the shared responsibility model that Walid will go to in a minute. And then the concept of connected to, that things like PCI bring into play, that virtually stops unless you explicitly provision it, because that's one of the benefits of software-defined networks. Like, connectivity just doesn't exist until you intentionally provision it. So if you don't provision it, you don't have to worry about it, with a couple of exceptions. There are some cloud resources that have general open network connectivity by default to each other, such as EC2 instances on AWS can natively communicate with other systems in its own subnet. But cloud services themselves don't talk out. So unless you tell it to talk out, you've got a level of segmentation in place. And on that, I'm going to kick it over to Waleed to talk to us about the shared responsibility model.
Thanks, Ted. That really was a lot to consider, a lot of technical capabilities and truly opportunities that are unique to the cloud are really afforded to us with these migrations, which is quite frankly why it's such an expanding opportunity that organizations are rapidly jumping into. But again, as attractive as those capabilities are, ensuring that the appropriate protections and security strategies are applied is truly critical. So as much as it is a foundational to understand the business objectives, understanding your relationship with your cloud service provider is just as key. And so really what we're seeking to reiterate here with this shared responsibility illustration here, which thankfully was provided by AWS, it really shows a delineation of the foundational components that the cloud service provider is traditionally responsible for. And showing that clear distinction really helps drive the conversation to the customer, to the client that's consuming those services, and really drives an awareness and accountability of what security practices, what technologies, what monitoring, what business as usual practices need to be abided by in order to take advantage of those wonderful capabilities that Ted just spoke about in the prior slide. Again, having experience with AWS and having an open dialogue, transparently discussing how designs and architecture and day in, day out build operations are moving forward is really key to truly understand how you have a full, robust, and quite frankly, comprehensive security strategy in place. Those accountabilities sometimes are called out in different contracts, but truly understanding how they're applied in your day in and day out gives you a well-rounded understanding about how you're applying a compliance strategy. So just touching on the illustration here, again, at the lower portion, the foundational piece, in this example, AWS is showing that they are providing the security services of the cloud, those foundational components, the availability zones, the various regions, the foundational networking, storage, and compute capabilities. That's the components that they're bringing to the table. But as a customer, as a client that are using those components, anything that's built on top of that, from the OS, the applications, and the data that's being introduced, that's truly in the hands of the consumer, the customer. It's their accountability to ensure that they are appropriately integrating appropriate security measures to manage that data appropriately. Again, ensure that that delineation is understood and that the strategy appropriately represents those accountabilities between the customer and the cloud service provider. And moving to the next slide, I believe we're really focusing on PCI as an example. Again, the presentation and the components that we're talking about really aren't specific to PCI, but using it as an example, since it is a widely acknowledged compliance component that a lot of financial institutions have to abide by, we wanted to use this as an example to talk about the different areas of scope considerations that come into play. Again, from the last slide, the responsibilities between you as the customer and the cloud service provider, showing that delineation, whether in contracts or in responsibility matrices, starting with that accountability and then building up an understanding about how the appropriate security and compliance processes are built upon it. Ensuring that the people that are engaged in the cloud operations, in the engineering, in the monitoring components understand if there is a security event, where could the potential communications lie in tracing the particular issues, using forensic capabilities, using tooling, but truly understanding that dialogue and the participation of the cloud service provider in going through some of those capabilities. Ensuring that the processes that support the security strategies are implemented in a way that appropriately take advantage of the data elements and the configurations that the customer is responsible for. Again, ensure that the processes are appropriately comprehensive for that particular security scope. And then most certainly the technology components. If the customer is applying the applications, that's applying the data, ensuring that the technological components to secure that data is appropriately configured to comprehensively monitor that environment really gives you that full opportunity to address that security scope range. And with that, I think we'll move into some takeaways from this. And going back to, again, really understanding the cloud business objectives. Why has your organization moved to the cloud? What services, what applications, what interfaces with your external clients are being engaged? Creating that awareness of preserving and the integrity of your scope and the particular data that you need to protect. Transparently speaking to folks in your organization about the security strategy and what potential compliance regulations that you're subject to really drive that awareness of, again, maintaining a good business as usual security and compliance strategy.
Yep. And big takeaway is to operationalize your security and compliance, bake into your business as usual routines how you manage your scope, how you manage your segmentation, how you manage all of your security controls so that you aren't kind of retrofitting prod a day, a week, a month after you've already gone through all the development cycles. Include it in from day one, include it in the original user stories, make them part of the initial build requirements, and ideally bake in checks along the way in your build pipelines to ensure that the compliance objectives are included, that there are checks that say don't accidentally strip out your segmentation controls. Make sure nobody is allowed to add a security group that's wide open to the world. It's much easier on everyone if, as much as you bake it into your day-to-day routines, whether it's manual, whether it's automated. If you have the luxury of creating the automation, please spend a little extra effort to add the automation that keeps everything in place and lets you know when it isn't. Ideally, self-healing is awesome. And then the last big takeaway is understand the cloud factors that need to be considered when you define and you maintain your scope. Right? Cloud platforms are not created equal by any stretch of the meaning. I happen to like AWS enough to go work for them. We've got a lot of neat services that do a lot of neat things, but so do all of our other cloud providers. They're not all the same. So you need to know what the shared responsibility boundaries are for your provider and specific to your services. Different services have benefits or hidden pitfalls that you might not be aware of. So know your services, know the aspects of the cloud that factor into your own environments. Because without that, it's just a matter of time before something explodes on you, honestly. And a lot of my customer conversations involve both of these points where customers don't operationalize their compliance and don't know their cloud well enough to understand what they might or might not be doing wrong. So those are our core takeaways. Welly, do you have any final words for our audience?
That last point that you're touching on there about maintaining scope, I think is definitely something that is worth underscoring. That once you do make your move into the cloud, once you do apply a security strategy, a well-rounded one, just understand that businesses continue to evolve, and the scalability and speed that cloud offer, as attractive as they are, can significantly change your security posture and expose you to new elements that perhaps you weren't originally considering. So again, baking in those routines, baking in those compliance hygiene practices really give you an opportunity to control that aspect of it. Well, it's been our pleasure pleasure speaking to you today. Thanks again. If you have any particular questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Same here. Thanks for your time.